kinds of classes. I really did, as you would in a business major. Classes on ethics and organizational processes and logistics, statistics, lots of numbers. But I can't think of a single instance where I took a class or course dedicated solely to leadership. I mean, sure, there was lots of managerial classes, right? Things like that to help you manage and oversee. You can be a good manager and not necessarily possess leadership qualities. And it just struck me as interesting that 4 years into a degree, no leadership. Well, since graduating, more than 15 years ago, it's crazy to think, I've come to realize that when it comes to learning leadership principles, leadership learning is a lot like parenting, and that is, it's more often what's caught than taught. I've heard that said a lot about parenting, and as I reflect on over the years, various jobs that I've had, it seems to be true about that. I don't know about you, but over the years, having various jobs, and rarely have I ever had the privilege to work for somebody that I could honestly say, now that's a leader. I want to be like that person. I want to do what that person's doing. I want to learn how to lead like that person. Nobody could really come to mind in that light. Usually, I find that it's the opposite. And I bet most of you that are listening and watching to this, that you could probably think back to bosses, leaders, in current or former, thinking, yeah, that was not a good boss. That was not a good leader. That was not a good manager, right? More often than the ones that really would shine. Often, we find ourselves learning what not to do as leaders rather than what we should do. Well, two of my favorite experts in the area of leadership, especially in the business world, are Ken Blanchard, and of course my all-time favorite, John Maxwell. Many of you probably read John Maxwell, listen to his podcasts. They're absolutely fantastic. But he has a statement that's really profound, and I want to share that with you. He says, leadership is not about titles, positions, or flowcharts. It's about one life influencing another. I love that. John Maxwell also has another statement that I'd like to share. It says, the measure of a leader, it's not in the number of people who serve him or her, but the number of people he or she serves. The measure of a leader is not the number of people who serve them, but the number of people they serve. Well, today we're going to see Jesus, who I think is the foremost expert on fantastic leadership. It's all over the place. And he's going to show us some really neat stuff. We're going to see Jesus introduce one of the most probably powerful, transformational, inspirational leadership principle on the planet. Leaders who you respect practice it. The ones you don't. So we're going to get back to the story here. And as a quick recap, we're in the series 90. It picks up with Jesus, starts out his adult ministry, right? We visited the banks of the Jordan River, and we've been walking through various key spots in Jesus' ministry. It's been fascinating to learn. Of all Jesus' miracles, though, especially the ones that we have or haven't read about, one in particular seemed to cause the biggest stir. And that's because this miracle, Jesus raised Lazarus. Lazarus seemed to be pretty well known in the area from what we gather. Word got out that Lazarus had died. And, so much so that word traveled back to Jesus. Hey, Lazarus is sick. Lazarus is dead. At this point, we're going to pick up in the story as Jesus moves through a series of events that's going to take us to where he teaches this pinnacle leadership principle. And we're going to start around this time, right after Jesus had raised Lazarus. But I want to make it clear, Lazarus, this isn't like Princess Bride, where he was mostly dead, right? And we're going to go through his, pockets or whatever, looking for loose change, because he was dead. Like, dead. He was embalmed, he was wrapped up, he was put in a tomb. He was not expecting to come out. Nobody expected Lazarus to return. He was down for the count. It had been a couple days, In fact, in the old King James language, if you go back and at the scene where Jesus is going to raise him out of the grave, he says, "All right, take roll the stone back. We're gonna get to Lazarus." And somebody says, "But Lord, he stinketh." Right? I love that old-fashioned language. It's just kind of fun. But they're like, there is a lot of nasty in there right now. Okay, we don't want to be raising that from the dead, right? We don't want that walking out here. Not to mention, how could he? But Jesus did. It was incredible. And we're going to pick up the story here this morning in John's gospel. And let's take a look at it now. It says, "But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done." Some of them, the people that were witnessing, right? The chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. And if you remember from our talk last week, we got to meet our friend Nicodemus, who had kind of a special place for Jesus. Well, Nicodemus was one of these elites that sat on the council of the Sanhedrin. And for those that aren't experts in ancient governmental religious systems, right? The Sanhedrin was basically like the convening of the Supreme Court and the Congress and such, all in one spot. The Sanhedrin was so important. They were the liaison between the occupiers of the time, which were the Roman Empire, to the people, the Jewish people. They were kind of the opposite. They were the liaison between the Jewish people, and they would talk to Rome. They kept the peace. They kept the law. They were pretty important in their culture. And they were seated in Jerusalem, which again at this time was the metropolitan, really the key area for commerce, religion, law of the area. And again, Nicodemus was there when they convened. And John goes on to say that the Sanhedrin got together and started asking themselves, what are we accomplishing here? We keep getting together. It says, here is this man performing many signs. There's Jesus. He's doing his thing, right? They said, if we let him go on like this, everyone will what? Believe. They will believe in him. And then it goes on. They're getting real serious now. They said, and the Romans will come and take away both our temple and our nation. And if you recall, over the past few weeks, we've been talking about just how important the temple was to this culture. It represented their religious system and really the governmental system under God, using the Pharisees and chief priests kind of as their conduit, right? The law keepers. The temple was everything. People would die for the temple. I mean, history just could not emphasize enough how important the temple was to the people. And they were concerned about Jesus coming in. But this also really, I think, exemplifies that they were trying to hold on to everything of the past. They have their system in place. They've been trying to keep law and order. They've been trying to keep whatever semblance of a nation together they have because, again, they've been occupied so many times, and currently it's the Romans, right? They're just trying to keep the wheels from flying off the cart in their culture. And here Jesus comes along stirring things up, and they're saying, if we don't stop this guy, it's going to get crazy. It's going to get bad. And John's account goes on to say that so from that day on, they plotted to take his life. Now, it's interesting that we see at this point that Jesus somehow found out about this plot. He was a pretty popular guy around the area, so it's not, too hard to think that somebody might have clued him in. But remember, our friend and buddy Nicodemus, he was on the Sanhedrin. He seemed to have a soft spot for Jesus. He was interested in what Jesus was about. Who knows? Maybe he sent a secretary to go send Jesus an email or something. I don't know. We're not really sure, but Jesus finds out about the plot. And because of that, it says, therefore Jesus no longer moved about publicly among the people of Judea. See, up to this point, he was very publicly moving around, right? It was not hard to find and spot Jesus, his disciples, and the whole posse and people that would follow him around. But here's the thing. At this point, Passover was just around the corner. This big event, this big national event that would happen, Passover. And John's account states that there were spies all over Jerusalem looking to arrest Jesus. They were looking for Jesus. They wanted to arrest him. They wanted to stop him. And, I think about this, this point, there's this culture of of kind of conspiracy going around, right? There's spies, they're conspiring to kill Jesus, they're looking for the guy. So, if we look ahead at with Judas, when he betrays Jesus, it probably was not hard for him to find a way in and have that transaction found out. They're probably pretty excited about it, kind of like a bounty that would eventually cash in on the reward. So there's this tension going on right now, though, at this point with Passover around the corner. Well, days just before Passover, Jesus and company, they go back to Bethany, right, where Lazarus was raised from the dead, and they go back to Bethany on their way to Jerusalem. And no surprise, John shows us that a large crowd of Jews found out and followed Jesus because he was there and came not only because of him, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So Jesus and Lazarus, they could have taken this show on the road, which is basically what they did, right, when they showed up to Bethany. Bethany, for all intents and purposes, became kind of a tourist attraction at this point. They wanted to see this incredible teacher that everybody's been talking about. It's been doing signs and wonders and miracles and even raising dead guys, right? Oh, and there's one of the dead guys now. There's Jesus, the healer, the teacher, and the dead guy that's now running around. It's crazy. But John goes on, he says, so the chief priests made plans to kill Lazarus as well. I mean, come on. The poor guy was just raised to life again. He was already dead once, and now they want him dead again. I mean, these guys were just not having it. They were not happy about what Jesus was doing. John goes on to say that for on account of him, many of the Jews were going over to Jesus and believing in him, right? Because they saw Lazarus in real life. They knew he died. They knew he came back, and there he was. Like, wow. And it's interesting because this crowd, they got to see Jesus perform his miracles and signs and wonders right in front of them. It was no stretch of the mind. If they said, well, we heard about Jesus doing stuff, they could run up the road or wherever he was at, and they could find him and see for themselves what was going on. It was incredible. Well, the next day, the great crowd that had come for the festival, meaning Passover, heard that Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem. Whoop, whoop. This is like pretty much all they would have been talking about. This was the talk of the town. I mean, we love championship sports, right, in our culture. Right now it's the NBA has been happening, and that's been kind of exciting to watch. But this is so much bigger. This is like ultimate stardom, things going on. So, it says, the Pharisees said to one another, see, this is getting us nowhere. We've conspired, we've plotted, we've hired spies and bounty hunters. We're trying everything. We're even threatening to kill the dead guy again, right? Look how the whole world has gone after him. I think this is a bit of an exaggeration, but to them, that's pretty much what they thought. Like, we're supposed to be the guys keeping things in order, and everybody's following Jesus. Everybody's doing it. Now, I want us to stop and take a pause here. I really don't want to move too fast through this because I want us to capture the incredible buildup that's taking place here. It's easy to just read things like, and Jesus went here and crowds followed him. But the stage is set. Emotions are high. Jerusalem, which again is the center of commerce and religion and government of that region, right? Jerusalem is filled with spies and expectant fans. There's a huge tension that's building. And Jesus begins his final trip to Jerusalem. Now, at this point, Jesus is probably the only one that knows this, right? Well, maybe not really, because we see now, we pick it up in Mark's gospel. It says, they were on their way up to Jerusalem with Jesus leading the way. Okay. Again, he took the 12 aside and told them what was going to happen. And I just want to pause there because anytime we see again, we can pretty much gather that this was not the first time Jesus has said that, right? He's probably tried telling these guys at least once, other times before, what was going to happen, how it was all going to be laid out. So there they were. They're on the way to Jerusalem. Jesus takes them over here to the rest stop. He says, all right, guys, let's have a chat real quick. Let's sit down. And he says, we're going up to Jerusalem. Thank you, Captain Obvious. We know that, right? But he says, here's what's going to happen. We're going to go there. And the Son of Man will be betrayed by the chief priests, or to the chief priests and teachers of the law. He says they will condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock him and spit on him and flog him and kill him. 3 days later, though, he will rise. And I got to think with a crowd of people, but particularly the 12 disciples there must have been some A-type personalities, right? You know, the ones that were always wanting to be in front of the trend. They wanted to know, okay, what's Jesus' schedule? You know, where are we going today? What's he going to do? Let's be on top of everything, right? Well, for those folks, Jesus just gave them the entire itinerary for global and eternal salvation. He just gave them the roadmap for what was going to be the biggest event of all human history. But for some reason, it didn't seem like it was getting through to them at all. I mean, what was he even talking about at this point? Considering the momentum of the movement, this was totally unthinkable. They had a growing fan club. I like to think of like a first century version of like the Timbers Army, right? Not just the Yago team, the ones that are just absolutely diehards. I mean, they are sold out. They're wearing the stuff. They're waving the flags. They're screaming the chants. They are all about it, right? They had a growing fan club like that, just waiting for him in the city. And he even raised a dead guy, right? Dead and buried. He raised a dead guy back to life. So for Jesus to be talking like this was just, why? Right? It's interesting. Jesus just explains what's going to happen to him, what's going to happen ahead, right? And the disciples, you would think they'd be like, let's see. Okay, wow, that seems pretty serious, Jesus. Well, wrong. Because then Mark, he takes this account. It says, then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, the sons of thunder. These guys were, I just see them just brawling all the time for some reason. They came to Jesus and said, so after Jesus' little chat, I could see him kind of walking up to the front of the classroom. They're, a teacher, they said, hey, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. Now, when's the last time you went to your boss, or if you're in school or college, you went to your professor, teacher, and said, hey, person over me in authority and teaching, I want you to do whatever I ask. I mean, that's we wouldn't even do that now. And after what Jesus said, they're going to ask this. It was like they're saying, you know, Jesus, what you just said, I mean, that's too bad about the spitting and the mocking and the flogging and the dying and all, right? But hey, could you do us a favor? Could you do us a solid, Jesus, right? And Jesus could have just slapped him upside the head, which honestly, that probably would have been my reaction, if not a serious eye roll. But once again, Jesus, in his grace and mercy and his calculated way, he doesn't do that. He responds like this. He says, well, guys, what do you want me to do for you? He asks. So they replied. They're like, okay, let's get it out there. They said, hey, let one of us sit at your right hand and the other sit at your left hand in glory. Is that cool? So Jesus, so after all that spitting and the mocking and the flogging and the dying and all that stuff, right? Once that's all over, we want positions of authority in your organization. I mean, surely that's where this is going, right? We see what's been going on. We see what's ahead. Like, we want to be those C-level executives in your new thing. That's cool, right? Wow. Jesus says, you don't know what you're asking. You guys really do not know what you're asking. See, Jesus knew that glory would precede glory. Jesus knew exactly what was waiting him in Jerusalem. But these guys thought, well, sure we do. We know what's going to happen. We can handle it, right? We're the sons of thunder. We can do it. Not so much. Later, we're going to see the account of when the soldiers show up in the garden and Judas betrays him, right? As soon as the authorities show up, man, they all scram. They run. So they couldn't even get to the gory part. They couldn't even get to the police part. They were gone, right? But here's the interesting thing. You would think that the rest of the disciples would watch these two knuckleheads have this interaction with Jesus right after he told them what was going to happen and be like, come on, guys, get with the program. Don't you know what Jesus just said? Aren't you listening? But did they do that? No. It says when the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. It's like siblings fighting over something. They said, hey, not fair, not fair, right? They were afraid of somebody else getting ahead of them in the line. Again, I think of kids. I have kids and I love them, but if I give one of my kids something, surely the other two are going to want the same thing, especially if it's really good, right? Or give them a treat or a toy. They're like, wait, that's not fair, right? How many times have you heard that if you're a parent or somebody watching kids and other people? Well, the disciples now, they're just fighting over themselves. Well, Jesus, watching this go down, he's probably just scratching his head and be like, oh, man, facepalm, right? Jesus calls them together and said, here it goes. He says, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles, see, they lord it over them. And they're high officials. They exercise authority over them. Jesus is reminding the disciples at this point that how the Gentiles use authority for their own benefit, regardless of what it meant for those under their authority, right? They just did what they wanted to do because they were the guys in charge. The disciples were saying, yeah, we know. We know that's why we're asking Jesus, because we want to get in ahead of the line, right? We know how this authority thing works. We want in on that. We want some of that. And Jesus completely takes them by surprise, takes us in a different direction. He answers him with these words. He says, not so with you. They're saying, we want all this stuff, Jesus. We want to be cool. We want to be in charge. We want to be right there at the top with you. We want the big office with the corner window view. And Jesus is like, nope, not for you guys. See, these are words that Jesus spoke to them, but that we as Jesus followers today, we really need to take to heart. We need to take these words to work, and we need to take them home. See, in God's upside-down movement that he started, you are to leverage authority differently and with a different purpose and person in mind. Jesus goes on, he says, instead of all that power trip stuff, whoever wants to become great among you, and notice Jesus doesn't say, don't bother going for greatness, okay? Don't go there. There's nothing wrong necessarily with aspiring to greatness, okay? It's fine, right? It's fine to want to be successful at stuff, be good at things and what. Jesus is saying it's okay to be a ruler, an official, whatever you want to do. It's the motivation that matters. And ultimately, as we're about to find out, it's what you do with that position. So instead, whoever wants to become great among you, says this, must be your servant. Oh, man, cue the disappointment track for the disciples at this point. It's like, right? Wait, Jesus, no, this is not the job offers we were hoping for. See, to us, a servant, it's a concept, and in our culture, we've seen a lot of different variations of it. And at this point, the disciples, they very much knew what servants were. To serve each other, I mean, that means go to the back of the line. That's not fun, Jesus. That's not fun. And Jesus could have said at this point, wait, I'm not done. There's more. And he says, whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. Man, I know there's so much cultural connotation around that word right now, even in our culture, but back then, it was really no different. See, that is Jesus telling us that you got to be at the back of the line. And in this culture, servants, they came in all shapes and forms and sort of hierarchies and structures and different situations. But by and large, a servant was probably there because it was, his employment, or maybe they got the job there, or a family just worked for another family, that kind of thing. They were a little bit more like employees in some cases, not all. They could be fired or go find something else to do if they were lucky enough. But a slave, Jesus takes it even further. See, they had no choice but to serve whomever they were bound or indentured to. And if you read the New Testament all over, we use this term as being slaves to Christ. It's saying, you know what? We are about Jesus. We are going all for Jesus. We have no choice but to follow him. And Jesus is saying at this point, nope, you're not going to be C-level execs. Heck, you're not even going to be middle management. You're going to be the janitor. But before they could object, he said something we should all memorize. He said, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but what? To serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. Jesus came to serve and give his life. They had no idea what was coming, and they had no idea that Jesus meant it literally. Jesus was the king who came to reverse the order of things. Jesus would lay down his life for his subjects. This was a completely new concept. Kings did not give their lives for their subjects, right? Kings lorded over their subjects, and they commanded things, and it was all about them. And Jesus is saying, no, I'm going to lay down my life. And he would require his subjects to do the same for one another. Now, the disciples got this eventually. We don't see it right in this very moment. But if you read in Acts, there's some really amazing accounts. And what we see is we find the disciples at that point, all right, post-crucifixion, resurrection, they are busy. They got this whole serve thing. They were so busy serving widows and doing the work of serving and loving one another that literally people in the early church had to come and pry their hands off of their serving trays because they're like, look, guys, you follow Jesus. You know what he said. We need you to teach us, right? You are the only ones that know what he said. So look, we'll find some other people to help serve these folks. We need you to come instruct us and teach us so we can keep this thing going, right? It's incredible. Eventually, they got the fact that Jesus was the king who came to reverse the order of things. But I don't think that it was this roadside chat that really did the trick. They arrived in Jerusalem to much fanfare and shouts of Hosanna, right? This is the triumphal entry. And we would see that people were basically expecting Jesus to announce that he was king at this point. And the stir that this all caused could not be over-exaggerated. Remember what I said. There were spies, Rome was watching, and the Sanhedrin and the religious leaders were watching, the people were watching, the disciples were watching, and they all had to be thinking, well, surely this is it. This is where Jesus declares that he is king. But they gathered for the Passover meal. They made their way into the city. They made their way past the crowds. They found a cool spot. They had a meal. And all of a sudden, Jesus does something completely different. He stands up, right, from the table, and he begins the process of foot washing. Jesus took off his outer clothing, we see, and wrapped a towel around his waist. He took off all of his garments, things that would mark him as a rabbi and a leader, right? He took off his shirt and he put on an apron, and he got down and started washing feet. Well, I mean, at this point, they're panicking, right? The disciples, anyone in there, they would have been panicking. Not one of them had offered to do what was considered to be slaves' work. And I just want to highlight the fact that the foot washing concept in this culture especially, that was reserved for the lowest of the low. I mean, if you did not like your slave or servant, that's the job you gave them. Because this wasn't like, back then, this wasn't like socked feet, right? That they were nice and clean, and maybe they just smelled a little bad. They just, use a baby wipe or paper towel and wipe them down. No, these dudes were tromping around in sandals out there, and they had all kinds of stuff, right? There was no way Jesus was going to do that for them. And Peter, he even reacted. He says, no, you shall never wash my feet. Look, I've been walking around, right, miles and days of dirt and dust and feces and filth. Man, these things are nasty. These are gnarly. You will not be doing this. But Jesus did it. And it took a while. 12 pairs of feet, that takes a long time. And I bet you could hear a pin drop in this room as they're watching their master, their rabbi, their Lord, their Messiah get down and do the lowest job there was. Foot washing, it was not a pretty thing. They were all humiliated at this point. See, they saw Jesus' hands, what he was doing. They knew what those hands could do. They've seen those hands perform miracles and heal, even raise a dead guy, right? But there he was, using this as an opportunity to illustrate the roadside chat that he had just had with them not too long before. And when he had finished, Jesus says, guys, you call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. I love it when Jesus uses any kind of term, I am, because it reminds me of the Old Testament days where God gives Moses, this is my name. When you go to Pharaoh, tell him I am that I am. Jesus is just once again saying, yep, I'm God, and you call me the right titles. He says, now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you should also go wash one another's feet. Don't you love it when your boss or manager or someone high up in wherever organization you work for, they come out of their office, they come down the elevator, whatever it is, and they get in the trench with you. They're like, you know what? I'm going to show you how it's done. I'm going to do this with you. Get into the nitty-gritty versus one that just tells you what to do. Jesus is totally the boss that gets down there and says, this is how we do it. Let me show you here. He says, I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. He restates this, even the Son of Man did not come to be served idea in the next verse. He says, verily, very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Jesus is totally flipping the script and showing us the path to live a life of humble confidence. Right? Jesus is saying, in my kingdom, in my upside down movement, and this new thing that I've come to bring, what you thought was top down authority, no, this is bottom up service. And being a humble servant, having a humble confidence, which just means that we are confident in who we are in Jesus as followers, because he has given us our identity and our value. He has saved us. He's reconciled with us. And out of that, humility flows and we can serve. There's a quote many of you have probably heard. It goes like this. It says that humble people don't think less of themselves. They just think of themselves less. And I believe it was Ken Blanchard who penned that phrase, though if you do a Google search, you're going to find everybody from C.S. Lewis to John Maxwell and a bunch of others. But I've heard this phrase used, and I love this phrase, that humble people don't think less of themselves. They just think of themselves less. The disciples were arguing about who was going to be the greatest among them and get these great positions. And Jesus is like, y'all need to stop thinking about yourselves so much and start serving people. He goes on, now that you know these things, you will be what? Blessed if you do them. It's not just like, well, it's really going to stink, guys. I'm sorry. And that was not a foot pun. You will be blessed if you do these things. Guys, if you ever start thinking that you're somebody special, just remember this night that Jesus shows us and go find some feet to wash. That'll be pretty incredible. In the years following the resurrection, right, after the Passover, after everything that had gone on, the church did just that. Their others first mentality, it was appalling. In a culture that worshiped strength and victory and conquest, not really too all that dissimilar from what we still enjoy today. It was appalling to that kind of culture. But the upside down kingdom introduced by Jesus was appealing as well. See, Christians refused to abandon the sick. They took in and abandoned and exposed children. They became known, right, for the right things to do. How they treated people with compassion and generosity and equality and hospitality and dignity. This is what the church was known for. And in the end, their actions became contagious. Because against all odds, what would have been considered a cult following a crucified teacher with no territory, no military, no authority, survived and multiplied. And eventually, the whole system, the empire that was doing its darndest to wipe them out would eventually embrace it. But friends, this whole system, this was not intuitive to them. Honestly, it's not intuitive to us. This isn't a natural way to go about it, right? We want to fight and fight our way to the top. We want to be somebody. We want to do something. We want to be recognized. But this is the upside-down movement Jesus has brought, and he's called us to, that the first go last. And when we see it out there in the world, we see people doing these things, we admire it, don't we? We're like, all right, boy, that's great. Man, that's, well done. But as Christians, we're called to live it. Not just watch it, but to live it. And service begins with a question that leaders are often asked, but rarely ask to others. It's this: how can I help? And how can I leverage me for you? How can I take the position that I have and do something with it to help serve and benefit you? Jesus' followers should ask it often. We should ask those who least expect it and who least deserve it. That is so backwards and non-intuitive even for today. How can I help? In this way, we will be like our Father in heaven, who looked at our me-first world and asked, what can I do to help? Then he sent his Son, who did not come to serve, or did not come to be served, rather, but to serve. That was why Jesus came. This was certainly new. And honestly, we're still trying to figure it out to this day in our lives, aren't we? But Jesus wasn't through. And next week, Jesus takes the final layer of wrapping off of what he came to unleash in the world, this newness that he came to bring. So I'm going to encourage you, don't miss the next 3 weeks of 90 as we continue looking and finish out this incredible story of grace and salvation and the upside-down kingdom that Jesus came to bring. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for your grace, for your mercy. But God, we need to be humbled and in awe of the upside-down kingdom, the upside-down system. God, we need your help to learn to serve others, to not be so me-focused and what can I get out of it? But God, what can we give? How can we serve others? God, we pray for opportunities to be able to live this out in and out of our workplaces and schools and communities, neighborhoods and churches. God, may we learn to live this out and follow your example. We know it's not going to be easy. We know it's awkward as heck. But we also know that with the power of your Spirit and each other spurring each other on, God, that we can do this. So have your way in us, have your way in this church, and may you be glorified in all of it. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you all. Have a great week.